Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing About Face by David Gilmour.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So before we get into this, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So this is David Gilmour's second studio album, his second solo album, and this one was released a mere 6 years after his first self-titled debut album that we've already listened to on this channel. And both of these albums are surprisingly quite different, and the only linking factor between those two is of course the singing and guitar playing of David Gilmour, but other than that I feel like his sound has matured and, materialized into something else in those 6 years. Now, unlike what I do mostly when I review a second album of someone compared to the first one, I usually try and find similarities and differences between the two, but I'm not gonna do that here. I'm gonna look at this album as a standalone album because there's enough to say about it as a whole, and I think that's a good way of looking at it. Now, personally, I myself have never been the hugest fan of David Gilmour, at least alone, although I don't really know his solo works. I know some bits and pieces from here and there, but honestly, I believe that when it comes to Pink Floyd itself, I even loved, other players like Richard Wright, and I love Nick Mason, and I even love the theatrical ideas and the meaning that Roger Waters gives into the music itself, and David Gilmour is one of those players that in some form of way, I think he added a lot by the sound and his sound of his guitar and the sound of his vocals, but not a lot when it came to the artistic direction. And I might be wrong, but I will admit that the fact that he replaced Syd Barrett as the lead vocalist and guitarist did mean a lot to the success of Pink Floyd and the influential nature that they had for years to come. But unlike a band like the Beatles, which have all made banger songs and banger albums when they split, I think that Pink Floyd, on the other hand, don't really do the same thing alone, and each of their solo works, at least what I know by now, has not been as good as what they've made together as a band. Now, this album, released in 1984, is basically David Gilmour's answer to Roger Waters releasing his own solo album at the time, being The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. Now, it's really odd because in some way you'd expect David Gilmour to not be influenced by Roger Waters at all, because, they kicked him out of the band. Pink Floyd was basically thought to be dead at the time, although it wasn't. But, you wouldn't really expect to hear anything Roger Waters like in a David Gilmour solo album, but surprisingly you kind of do. So when it comes to the music on this album, I find that although it starts off with a pretty weak and mediocre song at the first, it straight up goes to a better song on the second one, being Murder. Now, Murder to me at least feels like something that if you'd replace the vocals, it would sound like a Roger Waters song, but because it's by David Gilmour, he gives his own spin on this song, and I like it very, very much. It is all the way through really fun. It has a really compelling story that to me at least reminded me of Crime and Punishment, so I like that very, very much. The guitar playing, every single one playing is great, and I have to give huge props to Pino Palladino, yes, that's a name, playing the bass on here and adding so much of his soul into this song. And I don't think it's worth mentioning, but I'll say it, this is my favorite song from this album, but don't go quite yet because the other songs on here, they're actually pretty good. Now, one thing I should note about this album, David Gilmour is not a multi-instrumentalist. He is well known to be playing mostly guitar, maybe sometimes the bass, but he doesn't go a lot further than that. Maybe, you know, I think he played harmonica in Pink Floyd at some point, but honestly, not a lot. He does most of the singing and the guitar playing on here, but he has a big crew of people doing other instruments and other backing vocals for him, and I think it adds a lot to the magnificence of this album. And you know, it's pretty odd, because if you know this album and you know his debut album, most people would say that this album is his weakest point in his career, but honestly, I don't see it the same way. I've listened to the first album and I think it was kind of repetitive, nothing too special, and it didn't have that saving grace of having David Gilmour on guitars and vocals doing everything. Honestly, I like the arrangement made on this one, and it's arranged by no other than Bob Ezrin, which was the person that helped, you know, create The Trial from The Wall, which is probably the best song from that album if you don't consider, you know, The Popular View. And I like this album very, very much more than the debut album, although a lot of people criticize it for being too different, because to me at least, I really like when people try and think differently and go outside the box and create something which is surprising at every turn, like this album is. And besides the track of All Lovers Are Deranged, which is basically a classic pop song rock, like nothing too special about it, honestly, I don't really like it at all. It's a bad song, but other than that, I think that every song on here features some side of Gilmour that you'd never experienced before, and if you haven't listened to this album, you'd be surprised to see what he dabbles in this one. Now, towards the end of this album, we are actually treated to two very interesting songs. The first one being Let's Get Metaphysical, which is a pretty, you know, substandard tune, which has an instrumental by David Gilmour, and it's so lovely. It's something that almost you'd feel like came off of the Division Bell, but not quite. There's something different about the sound, and it's really lovely. And then we get the last song on here, which is called Near the End, which has the first half of Gilmour singing and some instrumentals playing, but then you have the second half which closes off the album, which has an acoustic guitar solo which is just coming down from the heavens, followed up completely by an electric guitar solo by Gilmour, which sends us off from this album. And honestly, it would have been my favorite song if Murder was not as good as it is. So yeah, this is a surprisingly tasteful album. I liked it quite a bit. As I said, I like it more than the debut, and it's, you know, contrary to popular belief, because a lot of people don't see this album as anything good, but I myself, I don't know, I really liked it. I know it was fairly mediocre at some points, but if I enjoyed it, I enjoyed it, and I can't change that. So this album is gonna be rated appropriately. So this album cover was made by the legendary suoᴉሔrsǝnb. There are a lot of well-known cover artists in the prog scene like Roger Dean, but I think the second well-known is suoᴉሔrsǝnb from Hypnosis. Now, he made this cover alone, and honestly, there's not a lot to say about it. It's just a picture of lovely, you know, young Gilmour looking good as ever and some text above it. But still, this makes me kind of doubt whether he's a genius or he doesn't even try, because this is the same person who created covers like Dark Side of the Moon and, you know, Animals and Wish You Were Here, and they're all lovely covers. But this one is so simple, it does convey some, you know, meaning, some overall feeling. To me at least, this cover feels like autumn, and that's my favorite season, so I like this cover quite a bit, and it amazes me that it can reach those depths with just one photo and some text. So when it comes to the rating of this album, I'm gonna have to give it a very non-conforming 7 out of 10. I think it's a good execution album. I love it very much. I would listen to it again if I had the time to do so. But honestly, it's better than the first, and that's my own opinion. And if you care to disagree, please write it down in the comments. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow, because we're going to be listening to Photoplay by Jadis, the second Jadis album we're going to listen to on this list. But that's all, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.